Hello, I'm James Ezimoha and you're watching A News. Let's see your headlines. In his address to the nation, US President Donald Trump says US goals in the Iran war are nearly complete. Kyiv accuses Moscow of rejecting an Easter ceasefire, while Russia also claims full control of Lugansk. And the Artemis II rocket launches from Florida with 4 astronauts on a historic moon mission. US President Donald Trump says American military operations have reshaped the balance of power in Iran, even suggesting a de facto regime change during an Easter event. Meantime, Trump claims Iran is no longer a threat in his address to the nation, saying its military capabilities have been largely destroyed. Obey Shabander has more from Washington.
In a nationwide address to the American people on Wednesday evening, President Trump delivered a speech that outlined the core objectives of Operation Epic Fury in the ongoing war against Iran. President Trump referred to the military operation that's designed to neutralize Iran's missile and nuclear weapons production capability as a, quote, true investment in your children's and grandchildren's future. Trump said that the war has achieved most of its objectives ahead of schedule and will wind down soon.
We have regime change. We got it by accident. We actually got it by accident because I never liked the idea of, the regime change thing is too complex to put it down on a wish list, because if you don't make it with me, if I don't make it, I end up ahead. He didn't get the... So I never say I wanted it. So I never talked about regime change, but we got it. But we've done an amazing thing over there.
Among the key lines in the president's speech, he highlighted that the main focus of the military operation was to destroy Iran's weapons factories, destroy the Navy and the Air Force, and to ensure that any avenue for building a nuclear weapon was totally decimated. Trump stressed that allowing Iran a chance to build nuclear weapons would empower Iran's campaign, quote, of terror, coercion, and conquest.
Every American can look forward to a day when we are finally free from the wickedness of Iranian aggression and the specter of nuclear blackmail. Because of the actions we have taken, we are on the cusp of ending Iran's sinister threat to America.
Trump also highlighted that the military strikes would not continue indefinitely. Iran will, however, according to the president, be hit extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. The bombing campaign will be so severe and widespread that it will revert Iran, quote, back to the Stone Age, a stern warning by President Trump. U.S. Central Command says that the American armed forces have so far struck more than 12,300 targets in Iran and damaging or destroying over 155 vessels. What happens if negotiations with Tehran fail? Well, the consequences for Iran, according to the president, would include hitting each and every one of Iran's electric generating plants. I'm Ube Shabander, A News, Washington.
Iran's military says it is preparing for possible U.S. action, warning of an immediate response to any attack. The remarks come amid reports of Washington considering further escalation. Turaj Shivalilu has more.
Iran's operational headquarters must monitor enemy movements with utmost pessimism and accuracy and be ready to counter any method of attack. The country's Army Commander-in-Chief, General Amir Hatami, was quoted as saying by a state media on Thursday. In televised remarks on a state IRIB broadcaster, he ordered military units to maintain round-the-clock surveillance of U.S. forces and make immediate retaliatory response. This statement came as the U.S. Department of War reportedly prepares potential ground operation inside Iran, a development seen as a dangerous escalation in the ongoing conflict. Although U.S. President Donald Trump has said the war is nearing completion and could end within weeks, the Iranian general said in the event the enemy attempts a ground operation, no one should survive. Meantime, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian, in a letter addressed to Americans, urged them to look out beyond the illusions of war propaganda and watch out for a manufactured threat of Iran. He urged the American public to beware of politically loaded rhetoric and reconsider the realities of Iran as a historically non-aggressive power. As the war has become 5 weeks old, Pezeshkian stressed that the destructive impact of U.S. sanctions, war, and aggression on the lives of ordinary Iranians must not be underestimated. Turad Shiralilu, Tehran, Foreign News.
Global markets wobbled today after U.S. President Donald Trump warned in a televised address that military action against Iran could intensify, pushing oil prices sharply higher.
Oil prices surged after U.S. President Donald Trump warned that Washington would intensify strikes on Iran in the coming weeks. In a primetime address, Trump said military operations would step up, offering no clear timeline for ending the conflict.
Thanks to the progress we've made, I can say tonight that we are on track to complete all of America's military objectives shortly, very shortly. We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong.
Benchmark Brent crude jumped about 6% to around $107 a barrel as investors reacted to the risk of prolonged instability in the Middle East. Markets reacted broadly, with global stocks sliding and the dollar strengthening after the remarks, while the address offered little reassurance to investors. Global institutions, including the IMF and World Bank, warn that the conflict is having significant and uneven economic effects worldwide. Trump also suggested strikes could target Iran's oil and energy infrastructure if negotiations fail. The escalation has raised concerns over supply routes, particularly the Strait of Hormuz, which carries about 1/5 of global oil and liquefied natural gas. Meanwhile, Iran's armed forces warned of more crushing, broader and more destructive attacks, signaling no immediate de-escalation.
Britain is leading international efforts to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, bringing together dozens of countries for urgent talks on restoring global shipping routes. British Foreign Minister Yvette Cooper held virtual talks with over 40 countries on reopening the Strait of Hormuz. The meeting included France, Germany, Italy, Canada and the UAE, but not the United States. Iran has effectively closed the route, which carries about 20% of global oil, following US-Israeli strikes in late February. The disruption is pushing up energy prices and affecting global trade as talks focus on diplomatic and economic measures and the safety of ships and crews. A new UN report warns that traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has nearly come to a halt, disrupting global energy shipments. The slowdown is raising concerns over oil supplies, prices, and the wider world economy.
Transit through the Strait of Hormuz has slowed to near a standstill over the past month, according to the United Nations Trade Agency. The latest data shows maritime traffic has dropped by around 95% amid the ongoing conflict involving the United States, Israel and Iran, severely disrupting global energy shipments. The United Nations warns this could have far-reaching consequences, as the route handles a significant share of the world's oil and gas supplies. A prolonged halt is expected to push up energy prices and increase the cost of living worldwide. The agency has also downgraded its outlook for global trade growth, forecasting an expansion of between 1.5 and 2.5% in 2026, down from 4.7% the previous year. In response, global financial and energy institutions are stepping in. The International Energy Agency, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank say they are forming a joint coordination group to manage the economic and energy impacts of the crisis.
A Russian air attack has hit a port in Ukraine's Odessa region as Kyiv accuses Moscow of rejecting an Easter ceasefire. Meantime, Russia claims full control of the Lugansk region while pressing Ukraine to withdraw from parts of Donetsk.
A Russian air attack struck a port in Ukraine's Odessa region early Thursday, setting shipping containers ablaze. Officials say there were no casualties. Firefighters worked to contain the blaze at the site in Chornomorsk, where flames spread through stacked containers. Authorities say the attack was carried out by drones. Kyiv says the latest strikes come despite its proposal for an Easter ceasefire, and President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky accuses Russia of continuing attacks on key infrastructure.
This is the Russians' response to our proposal for a ceasefire for the Easter holidays. Ukraine openly made such a proposal to Russia. Russia responds with Shaheds and continues its terrorist operations against our energy system and against our infrastructure. I spoke to the American team today, in particular, about this, Russia's daytime attack. Other signals are needed, and a truce on Easter could be just the signal that tells everyone diplomacy can be successful. Ukraine is doing everything to support the efforts towards peace. Today we spoke in detail with Steve Witkoff, US President Donald Trump's special envoy, Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, US Senator Lindsey Graham, and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte joined in. We talked about how to strengthen diplomacy, what steps are possible, also about security guarantees and about involving the Europeans.
Separately, Russia says its forces have taken full control of the Luhansk region in eastern Ukraine, capturing what it described as the last remaining area outside its reach since 2022. Ukraine disputes that, saying there have been no battlefield changes there over the past 6 months. The Kremlin has also renewed its demand for Ukrainian troops to withdraw from parts of Donetsk still under Kiev's control, a position Ukraine has repeatedly rejected.
French President Emmanuel Macron has arrived in South Korea for a 2-day state visit following his trip to Japan. He was welcomed at Seoul Air Base with an honor guard and gun salute. Later, Macron visited the War Memorial of Korea, where he paid tribute to those who fought in the Korean War. Macron is expected to meet President Lee Jae-myung, with talks focusing on trade, investment, and artificial intelligence, as Seoul looks to expand cooperation with France in AI and nuclear energy. Australia is introducing sweeping restrictions on gambling advertising, targeting the use of celebrities and children's exposure. The measures form part of a broader effort to address growing public health concerns.
Australia has announced a major overhaul of gambling advertising rules, including a ban on celebrity endorsements and tighter limits on when and where adverts can appear. Under the new regulations, gambling commercials will be capped at 3 per hour on television between 6 in the morning and 8:30 in the evening. They will also be completely banned during live sports broadcasts within those hours. Radio advertisements will be prohibited during school drop-off and pick-up times.
We are getting the balance right, letting adults have a punt if they want to, but making sure that our children don't see betting ads everywhere they look. Because we don't want kids growing up thinking that footy and gambling are inextricably linked. We want Australians to love sport for what it is.
Online advertising will also be restricted to users who are logged in and over the age of 18. In addition, gambling branding will be removed from sports venues and from the uniforms of players and officials. The reforms are set to take effect from 2027.
Four astronauts have taken off on a landmark mission around the moon in NASA's first crewed lunar flight in decades. The Artemis II mission is a key step in plans to return humans to the lunar surface and establish a long-term presence beyond Earth.
4 astronauts have blasted off from Kennedy Space Center on NASA's Artemis II mission, marking a major step in the United States' push to return humans to the moon. The crew lifted off aboard NASA's Space Launch System rocket with the Orion capsule carrying 3 American astronauts, Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen. The nearly 10-day mission will take them around the moon and back, travelling deeper into space than any human crew before. Artemis II is the first crewed flight under NASA's Artemis program, launched in 2017 to establish a long-term human presence on the lunar surface. After reaching orbit, the Orion capsule will separate from the rocket and the crew will carry out a series of tests, including manual control of the spacecraft. The mission is a key step toward NASA's goal of landing astronauts on the moon again by 2028, as competition intensifies with China, which is also aiming to send astronauts to the lunar surface by 2030.
After the break, we'll examine France and South Korea relations as both countries enter a strategic partnership. Stay tuned.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Welcome back to A News. President Emmanuel Macron began his state visit to Seoul today, immediately diverging from Washington on the Middle East crisis. Joining us to discuss this and the new big deal on defense and nuclear energy is Maxime Goen, Associate Professor at Nişantaşı University, Ankara, Turkey. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Pleasure.
Now,
hello, everyone.
Thank you. Upon landing, Macron called the U.S. Plans to use force in the Strait of Hormuz unrealistic, given South Korea's total dependence on that oil route. Does this French skepticism offer President Lee Jae-myung a diplomatic shield to resist U.S. pressure?
Definitely, and not just diplomatic, in the sense that, as you may know, France has a military agreement with the United Arab Emirates since 2009 and is actively implementing this agreement in sending Rafale jets and Tigre helicopters in order to shut down Iranian drones and to protect the United Arab Emirates territory. So it's not just about words, it's about active action against destabilization of this strategic road.
Now, reports suggest a landmark framework linking nuclear-powered submarines with defense-industrial cooperation. Is France effectively positioning itself as a primary alternative to the U.S. for South Korea's most sensitive military technologies?
Definitely. Nuclear-propelled submarines is typically what the South Korea is looking for currently in the context of increasing tensions with North Korea and its Russian ally. The United States has proposed itself as a provider for such a technology, but the relations between Seoul and Washington are not anymore what they used to be even 10 years ago. Yet, there is a civil nuclear agreement between South Korea and France since 1981. And the current context, by every aspect, makes the relationship changing of dimension. During the last year, the relations were flourishing, but always remain in the same dimension than in the past. Now, both sides consider that it's time to change the dimension, and nuclear-propelled submarines are typically a field of new cooperation.
Now, based on France's current industrial bottlenecks, do you think France is trying to leverage South Korea's high-speed defense manufacturing to solve supply issues, which in regards to Ukraine?
It's not publicized, but it's quite possible in the sense that Europe, not just France, has fixed the bottleneck issue in terms of artillery, but not yet in terms of multiple rocket launcher system and some parts of air defense. Yet South Korea has deserved excellent reputation in both fields. And Norway, for example, has announced last month that they will purchase South Korean multiple rocket launcher systems. So why not purchasing or making any kind of deal to provide also South Korean military equipment of these categories to Ukraine? It's quite possible.
Mm-hmm. Now, France holds the presidency of the G7. How does this visit that has elevated the relationship of both countries to a comprehensive strategic partnership change South Korea's standing within the G7?
Until now, South Korea had good relations with every member of the G7, but only America had a special relationship with Seoul. Only America was a strategic partner. Now Seoul has at least 2 strategic partners inside the G7. So the invitation is not something new at all. They have been invited in 2021, 23, 25. But now they can see the G7 differently thanks to what is discussed and will be decided these days.
Yeah, both nations are nuclear power leaders. Are we seeing the start of a joint nuclear export bloc designed to compete with Russia and China, for example?
It's quite possible. We have to wait to see what exactly will be announced in terms of agreement. But as I said, there is a nuclear cooperation since 1981. There is a fierce competition between various powers. Both states are nuclear power, as you said. The first nuclear plants of South Korean history were largely built by the French. So given the current context, the general cooperation, it will be quite logical if something like that emerged.
Now, President Trump recently called South Korea not helpful regarding the Hormuz crisis. In this context, is Macron's visit a strategic move to help Seoul diversify its security dependencies away from an unpredictable Washington?
Definitely. Diversifying is a word President Macron has used a couple of hours ago after arriving in South Korea. The first thing he did, as you mentioned, was to pay tribute to the French soldiers and other soldiers who died for liberty in South Korea against the communist invasion. And the South Korean president published an op-ed in the French press this morning, if I'm not wrong, where he speaks about strategic autonomy. This is an expression used by President Macron since 2017, primarily for Europe, but not just for Europe, saying we must, as much as possible, build our own weapons, rely on ourselves, and stop thinking that the uncle from America will be always here, no matter what could happen. So the South Korean president did not use this kind of wording by chance or by coincidence. He exactly knew what he was saying.
Now, both presidents...
One more time, we will, and just one thing. The main obstacle until now to an elevation of the bilateral relations to strategic partnership was the fact that South Korea did not purchase massively French military equipment. In the current context, both sides could purchase military equipment, and it will, of course, contribute to the change of the dimension in the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Now, both presidents are expected to sign MOUs on AI and quantum technology, as you've just mentioned. Does this partnership aim to create a third way for tech standards that isn't dictated by, as you mentioned, Uncle from America?
I think so. France has a European cooperation in the microelectronics since decades with the French-Swiss-Italian company Microelectronics. It has a partnership with Japan since decades, which has been reinforced just these days during the visit of President Macron in Japan. And most of the high-tech French companies see South Korea as a priority market to establish South Korean subsidiaries, to sell equipment, to sign agreement of co-production. Meanwhile, South Korea has great ambitions in artificial intelligence, for example, and world-class production of microchips. So the complementarity are quite obvious, and the necessity to exploit these complementary are, I think, fully understood on both sides.
Now, With U.S. troops stationed near North Korea's border, Trump has linked peninsular security to the Hormuz blockade. Does Macron's presence in Seoul today complicate or clarifies France's commitment to the UN's enforcement against Pyongyang?
It clarifies. One more time, the first thing he did was to pay tribute to the French soldiers who fought the North Korean invasion. He reaffirmed the shared values between France and South Korea, including the UN charters, where it is written that a member cannot attack another member. Otherwise, he can be disciplined by economic and military measures. And as we already discussed, the military partnership will very likely increase between France and South Korea. So I think it's a clarification.
Now, France and South Korea are obviously both expanding their independent space launch capabilities. Could we see a joint satellite network established to monitor maritime security as global shipping lanes become more volatile?
I did not see an announcement of this kind, but as you know, there is a French-American Argos system, but it's very useful, but it's useful only for the ships who want to be identified. Some years ago, a French startup started launching satellites to identify ships, including those who don't want to be identified, ships of shadow fleets, pirates, and things like that. In this context, it will be not absurd, it will be not a surprise if South Korea wish to participate and if France welcome such a demand of participation. It will be logical, it will be normal given the technological level of South Korea.
Now, finally, President Macron is pairing high-tech defense deals with high-profile dinners featuring K-pop stars and filmmakers. Is this cultural diplomacy a superficial distraction, or is it a calculated move to brand France as a modern, attractive alternative to the US and China?
First of all, if France is the biggest touristic destination in the world since tourism exists, it's not pure coincidence. Correspondingly, the cultural diplomacy is probably the most successful aspect of bilateral relations between France and South Korea since decades. And something very similar could be said about the bilateral relation between France and Japan. So it's much more than superficial. It's something which has historical depth and which has also on both sides a significant economic dimension. President Macron unveiled the Pompidou Center branch in South Korea. South Korean culture is quite popular in France with important sales of books, etc. Video games, of course. So, no, it's not superficial, it's much deeper than that.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your time and insight with us, sir.
My pleasure.
After the break, we'll take a look at key stories shaping the region. Stay with us. Welcome back to Way News. Pakistan and the Afghan-Taliban have resumed talks in China amid rising border tensions. The discussions focus on security, border control, and restoring economic links. China is acting as a mediator, encouraging dialogue between the two sides. Magdum has more.
Officials from Pakistan and the Afghan-Taliban have resumed talks in China as both sides seek to ease tensions and rebuild strained relations following a rise in cross-border security incidents. The discussions involved senior diplomats and security officials from Pakistan alongside Taliban representatives from key ministries, including Foreign Affairs and Interior, with China facilitating the dialogue. The talks are primarily focused on security cooperation, especially Pakistan's concerns over militant groups, which Islamabad says operate from Afghan territory. Additional agenda items include border management, preventing cross-border infiltration, and restoring trade and transit routes that have been disrupted by recent tensions. Both sides are also discussing mechanisms to improve communication and avoid further escalation along their shared frontier. China has positioned itself as a mediator, encouraging confidence-building measures and sustained engagement between the two sides. Beijing has stressed that stability between Pakistan and Afghanistan is essential for regional security and economic connectivity, and has reiterated support for political solutions to the ongoing disputes. Hanu Maktoum, A News, Beijing.
The United Nations says Afghanistan remains one of the most dangerous countries in the world for unexploded ordnance, with more than 50 people killed or injured every month. UN officials warn that children make up the vast majority of victims as funding for mine clearance continues to fall. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has the details from Kabul.
United Nations says Afghanistan is still ranking as the third country with the highest number of casualties caused by unexploded ordnance, with more than 50 people killed or injured each month. Nick Pound, head of Mine Action Service at UN, says the figure means that on average at least one person is killed or wounded every day by explosives left behind from decades of conflict. He says around 80% of the victims are children. According to Pound, 90% of these casualties are caused by unexploded ordnance left over from the past 40 years of war. He says many of the victims are boys who came across the devices while playing or while looking after livestock. The UN also says the scale of contamination remains severe. Around 100,000 square kilometers of land across Afghanistan is still affected by unexploded ordnance. The agency says about 3 million people, as well as 800 educational centers and 200 health facilities, are located within 1 kilometer of contaminated land. The UN further added that with stronger international support, Afghanistan could be cleared of mines, allowing communities to return to safer and more normal lives. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexei Overchuk says new rail shipments to Armenia via Azerbaijan and Georgia are benefiting all parties involved. He noted that agreements were reached within days, with Russian grain already delivered by rail for the first time in 30 years and fertilizer supplies to follow. Overchuk said the expanding cargo flow creates new income streams for all countries in the corridor while strengthening regional trade and cooperation. Russia and Armenia vowed to deepen their ties after Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan held talks in Moscow with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The discussions focused on trade, bilateral ties, and economic and transport links in the South Caucasus. Dasha Chernyshova reports from the Russian capital.
These two countries have traditionally deep ties, and in his opening remarks, Russian President Vladimir Putin said he hoped that internal political tensions linked to the upcoming elections in Armenia would not harm bilateral relations. He stressed that the two countries are united by a shared history and what he described as civilizational community. The talks focused primarily on economic cooperation, with specific attention paid to Armenia's interaction with the European Union. President Putin warned that as Yerevan is developing its ties with the EU, it is clear that membership in both the EU customs framework and the Eurasian Economic Union is simply impossible. He also noted that Armenia benefits from lower gas prices as it is supplied by Russia. Putin said Moscow always welcomes anything that benefits the Armenian people. For his part, Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan thanked the Russian leader for Moscow's role in brokering peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan and said that the country is deeply valuing its ties with Russia. He added that those ties will continue to develop dynamically after Armenia's parliamentary elections. Pashinyan also said Armenia is expanding its energy cooperation with Russia, including the possible construction of another nuclear power plant. He noted that Yerevan has put its participation in the post-Soviet military alliance of the Collective Security Treaty Organization on hold. Both sides acknowledged that bilateral ties have gone through significant tests in recent years. Dasha Chernyshova for A News in Moscow.
The Organization of Turkic States has pledged to expand economic and investment cooperation Following a joint statement issued after a meeting of heads of government in Baku, the declaration calls for stronger trade ties, improved business conditions, and closer links between member states, including the removal of non-tariff barriers and the promotion of joint projects. It also highlights cooperation in key areas such as industrial development, digitalization, and green technologies as efforts continue to deepen regional economic integration.
Today, there are significant opportunities to expand cooperation among Turkic states across key areas, including trade, energy, transport, and digital transformation. In recent years, we have seen positive momentum. Last year, Azerbaijan's trade turnover with OTS member states increased by more than 5%, reaching $7.3 billion. At the same time, Azerbaijan's total investments in member countries have reached $21 billion. But our overall potential is far greater.
Georgia's growing geopolitical importance and its role in regional stability took center stage today as President Mikhail Kevelishvili met Slovak President Peter Pellegrini in Slovak's capital. The meeting not only highlighted bilateral ties, but also the strategic future of the South Caucasus. Nini Nikolashvili has more.
At the presidential palace in Bratislava, President Mikhail Kevelishvili met Slovak President Peter Pellegrini for talks that combined clear diplomatic support with broader geopolitical messaging. At the joint press conference, Pellegrini reaffirmed Slovakia's backing of Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. A standard but politically significant statement at a time when international borders and security guarantees are under pressure globally. However, beyond formal support, the discussions shifted to Georgia's evolving geopolitical role. Both leaders pointed to the country's position along the Middle Corridor, a trade and transit route linking Europe and Asia. Slovakia highlighted Georgia's logistical and energy importance, while Kevelishvili emphasized that regional connectivity projects increasingly depend on stability in the South Caucasus. This is where the tone became more strategic. Georgia was presented not only as a partner, but as a transit hub whose relevance grows alongside global economic and political shifts. At the same time, such positioning also places the country at the intersection of competing regional and international interests. The South Caucasus itself was another key topic. Slovakia welcomed recent de-escalation efforts between Armenia and Azerbaijan, noting Georgia's role in regional stabilization. The meeting also touched on EU enlargement. While Slovakia reiterated support for Georgia's European aspirations, the reality is more complex. Georgia's relations with parts of the EU have faced increasing strain in recent months. Against this backdrop, countries like Slovakia, along with Hungary, continue engagement with Tbilisi, a dynamic some analysts link to overlapping political or ideological positions. Alongside political discussions, both sides addressed practical cooperation, including trade, investment, and new direct flights between Kutaisi and Bratislava. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A-News.
Kazakhstan is looking to boost investment in its natural resources sector as thousands of potentially resource-rich areas remain unexplored. Officials say new reforms and incentives are already driving interest from investors, with hundreds of exploration and production contracts now in place. Our correspondent, Farza Kalimoziner, has more.
Around 3,000 subsoil areas in Kazakhstan remain largely unexplored. These are so-called greenfield sites where no full-scale geological exploration has been carried out. This was announced by a Vice Minister of Industry and Construction of Kazakhstan, Iran Sharkan, at the International Forum Geoscience and Exploration Central Asia. At the same time, the country is seeing growing investment activity in this sector. According to Vice Minister, since 2023, investments in geological exploration have reached approximately $900 million, while the number of active contracts for hydrocarbon exploration and production has risen to 319. Expanding geological coverage remains a key priority. Authorities aim to increase the explored area from 1.5 to 2.2 million square kilometers by 2026. To support this, legislative changes have already been introduced. This includes the formal recognition of unconventional hydrocarbons, simplified procedures for electronic auctions, and the development of an updated model contract for complex projects offering fiscal incentives. At the same time, conditions for investors are being eased. Companies are now allowed to correct errors in auction applications and return blocks without penalties if drilling proves unpromising. A measure expected to save up to $300,000 at each stage. Kazakhstan is home to around 10,000 mineral deposits, and over the past 5 years, total investment in this sector has exceeded $1 billion, reflecting continued interest in the country's natural resources. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Turkey is calling for the dismantlement of Israel's alleged nuclear weapons stockpile amid mounting tensions over the ongoing regional conflict. The remarks came from a senior parliamentary figure who also criticized the wider impact of the war on global stability. Here are the details.
Fuat Oktay, head of the Foreign Affairs Committee in Turkey's parliament, has called for the dismantlement of Israel's alleged nuclear weapons stockpile. Speaking before the parliamentary committee, Oktay said Israel's nuclear weapons capacity should be eliminated as soon as possible. He claimed that Israel had launched attacks on Iran over the latter's nuclear ambitions, while Israel itself maintains an undeclared nuclear arsenal. Israel has long pursued a policy of what it calls strategic ambiguity, neither confirming nor denying its possession of nuclear weapons. According to Israeli officials, this stance contributes to both deterrence and regional stability. Successive Israeli governments have maintained that Israel would not be the first country to introduce nuclear weapons into the Middle East. Oktay, speaking in parliament, also warned that the Israeli-U.S. war on Iran had spread beyond its initial scope, affecting Iraq, Lebanon, and the Arab Gulf states. He also said that the partial closure of the Hormuz Strait had disrupted trade and energy transit, adversely impacting the global economy. Although it is Israel's war, Oktay said, the entire world is paying the price. He further asserted that Israeli-U.S. military strikes on Iran lacked legitimacy under international law. Oktay also acknowledged Iran's right to self-defense while criticizing Iranian strikes on civilian infrastructure in neighboring countries, which he described as unacceptable. Separately on Wednesday, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said that Israel was the primary party responsible for the ongoing war. He also reiterated Turkey's determination to remain outside the expanding conflict. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
All right, that's all we have for now. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to A News.